Welcome to the show. I'm your host, David Mirza, and today on the Fit for Fortune podcast, my guest is Dr. Pat Davidson. This is one of the most impressive introductions we've had on the show so far. Check this out. Pat has a master's degree in strength and conditioning and a PhD in exercise physiology. He was a professor at 2 different universities. He's an ex-MMA fighter, amateur world championship strongman competitor. He represented Team USA in strongman at the Arnold Classic. He used to run a successful personal training business in Lower Manhattan and now runs his online program called The Athletic Weapon. I'm wearing a t-shirt today that says no bullshit on it, and I don't know many people that manifest this idea as much as Pat does. And today I'm hoping to learn more about his unique views on training. So, what athletic variables would you have a general population client measure who is looking for general health and longevity? Or another way to put it, let's say someone walks in and they just want to look better and feel better. What would you encourage them to keep track of anyway?
Yeah, I think it's just aerobic fitness, muscle mass, and strength are probably the variables that pop in the research. I know that a lot of people that have participated in more athletic training really like to promote this idea that everyone is an athlete, everyone should train like an athlete. But, we really can't say that at this point in terms of longevity. There's no evidence to really support that necessarily. Directly, like where people indirectly get into that idea is with this notion that power decreases at more of an exponential rate compared to strength as people age. But that's more due to the fact that it's a multiplication equation with power. So it looks really bad, but it's just sort of the fact that it's not an addition. It's strength multiplied by speed that gives you power. So if it was strength plus speed, it wouldn't look as bad, but it's a multiplication thing. So if either of those variables goes up, it just is like exponentially more pronounced in comparison. So aerobic fitness is by far, you can't actually say that anymore. The strength variable is coming along pretty rapidly in the research is showing that it's very important. Historically, aerobic fitness is the variable that pops in terms of mortality and morbidity numbers, body composition as well. So like if fat is anti-longevity. And just from my own experience with working in personal training, most of the people that are seeking out personal trainers are individuals that don't have as much of an athletic background, typically aren't as good at fitness. This is literally why they're seeking out a personal trainer. It's like me going to an accountant for taxes where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Hello. I'm bad at handling my finances. I need someone to do this for me and tell me exactly what to do. Don't expect me to be good at any of this stuff. That's generally what you're going to get from a client perspective for personal training, okay? If you are an online coach with a large following, that following is probably a lot of fitness people who are seeking you out to be their coach. And then you're like, well, everybody can do athletic stuff. So, I got into personal training coming from this like collegiate background and working with college athletes and things of that nature. And so I came in like, oh, of course, everyone's going to be an athlete. And then I worked with tech guys and CEOs and, divorcees of billionaires. And I was like, they can't throw med balls with any force. Like the jumping is non-existent. If I ask them to run fast, I think that their legs are going to fall off their body and hamstrings are going to explode. Let's pump the brakes on this a bit from a realistic expectation standpoint and do something that could actually provide a stimulus. So, yeah, that's both my sort of evidence-based and experience-based answer.
I think it's quite ironic that often these people that have the least amount of coordination are the ones that want to be more functional, whatever that means, and they are the ones that need the most amount of constraints and just getting eased into a training program.
I put the whole Rethinking the Big Patterns model together, wrote the book, Coach's Guide to Optimizing Movement. I kind of put this ground idea out there and, this sequencing concept based on probabilities of competent exercise with like, hey, start everyone with the most constrained, I refer to as grounded exercise. I don't care if they're going to be a clay court tennis player or a diver or a skateboarder. It doesn't mean they're good at exercise yet. And, we have them do anything right. Their squat, their press, their hinge, their pull, make sure that it's right. And from there, once it's right, now you can drive it towards a more specific version of the exercise for their needs, and what I just refer to as their ground-based sport-specific needs. And that's really how I look at exercise selection. But, this idea of just putting people into these open space, unconstrained, high motor control demand exercises too early, I think is the error that ultimately came from the functional training, whatever other terms people try to attach to it, that approach to fitness. It doesn't provide a sequenced graded exposure pathway towards appropriate performance of the appropriate exercise selection at the end of the road of motor learning.
I think these people that want to just be functional, they just want to sort of move around a little bit, but what they're missing is the fact that you could move in a way that over time your movement potential sort of increases or your movement options increase, whereas if you're just given a random sort of functional program, you will probably just keep using the movement patterns that you already have access to.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, you're probably not differentiating your movements as much as you think you are. In essence, like, you're out jumping and landing, and you can't do it in any other way than a hinge landing, okay? You squat, and it's actually a hinge. You hinge, and it's actually a hinge. So exactly. It's like you think that you're doing all of these variable movements when in reality, they're all just the same thing done in different sorts of named things. It's got a different name, but underneath it, it's the same thing. And most likely, it is fairly incompetent as well and lacking enough, force production to actually provide any adaptive stimuli.
So when you say the goal is teaching these people to just do anything right, what do you mean by right? Is it just targeting the tissue that we want to target?
Well, I think that from a personal training standpoint, like I look at it like this when I'm developing personal trainers. You've got aerobic fitness that you need to check that box, okay? You've got muscular strength, and the greatest predictor and most related phenomenon to muscular strength is the cross-sectional area of the muscle that you're testing for strength. So the reality of muscular strength is actually it's a hypertrophy game. So we are trying to grow muscle tissue and drive VO2 is the two big rocks of personal training. The problem with VO2 is that it takes a significant amount of time under the curve to actually create any change there. You typically are constrained to this hour period for personal training sessions. And so you really can't create that much VO2 change with what you're dealing with from that perspective. So, you have to get them to begin to just move more outside the gym. I think the best way to do that is to just check their phone every time you see them for their average step count. Okay, so your clients, every single time they show you, check in on their step count, you see how that's going. 10,000 steps a day is probably going to be more impactful for them as compared to the 2-minute burner finisher kind of a thing that you could do with them. People get sensation confused with what's actually going to create adaptive change all the time. They're going to feel like they did something that's really going to do something with the high intensity finisher. But the reality is that you just got them hot and sweaty and uncomfortable and out of breath for a little bit of time. But it doesn't have enough total contractions to really create a big mitochondrial change. You're not moving enough in terms of total volume to create any sort of measurable difference in the heart, particularly. Like maybe for a short period of time, you see these studies with high intensity interval training, they'll have like a 6-week improvement, and then it kind of tapers from there, and the people adapt to it pretty quickly. Whereas the longer duration activities are the ones that seem to continue to drive adaptation for a period of time. Like, my goal is, hey, get the person to start accumulating a floor of about 90 minutes of zone 2 a week and 10,000 steps a day, okay? What that means is 30 minutes of cardio 3 times a week. If you can get them there plus 10,000 steps, you are really checking the aerobic fitness box. What that means is, like, hey, if you can get them to go to the gym without you 3 times a week just to do cardio, you are doing a huge, huge favor to that person from every measurable perspective on life for them. Mental health, physical health, longevity, those end of life decades that can go really bad or stay pretty good. It's really the greatest gift you could ever give to somebody, is just getting them to be accountable for themselves. But if you expect to be able to check the other big box, which is the muscular fitness box, and you are sacrificing 30 minutes of the time towards the aerobic box, you're not going to be able to create enough training volume to be able to really provide significant muscle stimulus to train all the necessary muscles of the body. So I just look at it like, you've got to be able to provide enough stimulus to the, lumbopelvic femoral tissues, the thoracoscapular humeral tissues, and the sort of clavicular sternal humeral tissues. The long
upper pull, lower push, lower pull.
Exactly. It's almost like I like to just reword it in some ways just to get people thinking, like, what does this mean? It means hinge, squat, push, pull, in a couple of different directions with the pushing and the pulling. But if you need enough sets of that stuff across the week to be able to drive some change. And so I just think most likely, 3 times a week is probably necessary for creating something that would be enough of an effect over time. I know that there's research that 2 times a week, but if it's just 2 times a week, then it runs out of steam pretty quick. So if you're starting with 2 times a week, fine. If you can get up to at least 3 times a week, but it's got to be 3 times a week where you're concentrating on lifting weights. You can't just pull that. If you got an hour each time, and you've got to hit a squat, a hinge, and pushing and pulling with the upper body, with any real level of volume, you need that whole hour for that stuff, in my opinion. You can't be pulling out 15 minutes for foam rolling and other stuff. It's like, you got to drive those sets in there. And if you're doing them with appropriate range of motion, then you will be giving that person sort of the flexibility side probably good enough to account for that part of it as well.
So you mentioned zone 2 cardio to focus on. Why is zone 2 the magic? Why is it not zone 3, let's say?
Well, from a adherence perspective, people are much more likely to adhere to zone 2 because it's not as miserable and uncomfortable. Also, it just seems to create a giant adaptive punch where it's like, well, you can tolerate more minutes. And again, I think that a lot of this is just minutes spent. Like, time under the curve is sort of the big factor. Zone 3 has benefits, but if you're trying to accrue significant minutes, it's very taxing. There's going to be more fatigue that comes with that. So zone 2, you can accrue a tremendous amount of minutes and stimuli, and it will not be nearly as fatiguing for you on the back end of it. So you have to always think about it from the stimulus and the adaptations you're going to gain, but also with the fatigue cost that comes with doing these things as well.
I think my current clientele and what sort of people you used to deal with are quite similar. They're successful, busy, fitness is not their top priority. So let's say if we have a client like that and they have, let's say, 4 to 5 hours maximum per week to allocate to training, and they want to hit all the variables. They want some cardio, some training. Potentially, they want to improve on their mobility. How would you allocate their limited time in all these different?
Well, the mobility to me would just come inside the resistance training. If you're resistance training well with the appropriate exercise selection and you are going through really good full range of motion, I think you're hitting it right there. If your body composition is going in the right direction. See, I feel like this is something that it's probably really hard to measure scientifically and people don't talk about enough. I think if you're not excessively, fat and inflamed and swollen, you're probably going to have more range of motion. Okay. There's less stuff in the way of your joints moving through space. So if you're managing body composition, I think that goes a long way towards mobility as well. And it's a critical ingredient towards longevity anyways. So if you're lifting weights well and you've got your diet under control, I think that's going to pack 5 times the punch as compared to some corrective exercise buffet and, stretching protocol. If you can get people to deep squat and, hinge with a big stretch, potentially start getting into split squat positions, lateral squat positions, and you're getting some level of range through there, you're opening up the hips, you're stretching all the tissues appropriately. I just want to make sure it's done with pieces of equipment, exercise selection that gives the person a chance to do it with some level of competency as well as some level of loading stimulus where we're actually going to drive an adaptation. So I think that if you're doing that, we could allocate 2 to 3 hours a week towards the resistance training. And, then you've kind of got like 60 minutes left if you're talking about 3 hours towards resistance training. And if you're talking about 2 hours of resistance training, you're talking about 120 minutes remaining that you would dedicate towards aerobic training, which averages to 90 minutes. So you could potentially do some sort of an asymmetrical program design where it's 3 times 1 week and 2 times the next week for resistance training, which would create the equal asymmetrical design for aerobic training of, 60 minutes 1 week, 120 minutes the following week, which would balance out to 90 minutes is what I think is a good floor for zone 2 to really give enough stimulus for that variable to play itself out for the person.
Perfect. Thank you. Do you think zone 1 and zone 2 cardio also contribute to mobility?
If you're potentially doing it through enough of a range of motion, and also if it's helping you from a body composition standpoint, so, where it's not going to directly help you in terms of weight, all right? But what it could do is, for a lot of people, it regulates satiety. We do sort of see in the research that sedentary people have dysregulated satiety. And that dysregulated satiety leads to consumption that is excessive and weight gain and fat gain. So if it helps to do more movement from the perspective of what it does to the brain and the gut for satiety regulation, then it could really help from a body composition standpoint. And again, I think body composition is probably a significant factor for range of motion and mobility. But if you manage to do your zone 1 and zone 2 with enough range of motion with the movements, then yes, but then that would be really annoying at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. I'd have to, if you're outdoors and you're going hiking and it's actually like kind of a harder hike, that could definitely be your zone 2. There's research that shows that when you're in a cognitively rich environment, you're more prone to do more minutes of movement. So that's a factor. It's like when you're on just a treadmill, it's boring. Like when your mind is occupied, you're problem solving with it. It's a beautiful environment.
Right.
Like you'll probably do it longer. And the research seems to suggest that. And if you are hiking, then you kind of have to duck and you have to take bigger steps and go sideways, and it's more variable for sure.
And do you think something like an assault bike or swimming will have larger carryover to mobility than, let's say, I don't know, running? Or not full range enough?
I think maybe swimming, because of the, sort of like thoracoscapular humeral excursions that you're getting. I think water stuff is underrated. I think that that's an opportunity for people to potentially do movement with their femurs and hips that they wouldn't normally be able to do range of motion wise with gravitational demands. But you put them in an aquatic environment, and like people usually see, it's like, is flexibility training really a test of position specific strength? You know what I mean? It might be. Like, stretching might just be resistance training when you really get down to it. So if you are lowering the load that the femur presents in positions of, like, let's say abduction or ER or something along those lines, then it's less challenging, and you might be able to get more range of motion because you can handle that stress in those positions in the water that you wouldn't be able to do terrestrially. So I do think that for very tight people, aquatic environments for, if you did aerobic, like pool aerobic session, and it featured a significant amount of, unilateral hip abduction, side leg lifts, and even bilateral, you could jump up and do sort of like a lateral split. You'd probably be able to show a lot more range of motion. And if you built some strength and some neurology under those conditions, it might transfer over with a graded loading exposure to terrestrial range of motion as well. So I do think that there's some potential untapped resources that we haven't explored enough from a training perspective with that approach.
So far we have the big variables are body composition, strength, and VO2 max. With VO2 max, you said the biggest factor is just spending more time.
Yeah.
Would you also test for VO2?
Yeah, I think it's a very valuable test. It's, there's different ways that you can test. I think everyone assumes that it's always the direct max test, which is where you have the VO2 card and the gas collection. You bring the person to volitional failure on a treadmill or a bike or something like that. But there's plenty of, indirect max tests, like, the 1.5 mile or the Cooper test, like how fast can you do it or how far can you run in 6 minutes. Those are max tests where you predict the VO2 based upon performance. And those have very high levels of correspondence to the gold standard, direct max test measurements. And there's also submaximal indirect tests as well. There's submaximal direct tests. Direct just means that you're collecting gas. And indirect means that you're going to estimate based upon, some other variable performance measure in the test. But there's, the Queen's College step test is an indirect submax test that just literally requires like the person stepping up and down off of a 14-inch box or something along those lines. I can't remember exactly what it is. But if someone just Googled, VO2 max indirect submaximal tests, they could very easily get a rough estimate of what their VO2 max is without a whole lot of punishment and effort. And as long as you're measuring it the same way, same conditions over and over, you would see whether or not you're trending upwards or downwards or staying the same. And, there's really, we can see at this point, a linear relationship between all-cause mortality and VO2, which is about as powerful a statement as you can get. It used to be this thought that, okay, if you have very low aerobic fitness, all you really need to do is get to like moderate fitness and you're okay. And moderate fitness is pretty pathetic if you actually looked at the numbers on it. Very low fitness is like, oh God, that's terrible. But if you change from low to moderate, you'd reduce your chances of dying by 50% across 5 years, which is just unbelievable. But now they can really see that there's further benefit from going from moderate to high to very high. So the higher your aerobic fitness, the less likely you are to suffer any kind of death cause, which is an unbelievably powerful research statement. And then the strength factor is inside of any of those fitness groups of aerobics. If you measure the strength levels of those individuals, it is so if we go into the low fitness group, but we find the strongest people in low fitness, it's somehow like a buffer against those all-cause mortality pieces. And the strongest people from low fitness would be less likely to die across the next 5 years compared to the weakest people in moderate fitness. And so there's sort of this inside of the aerobic zone, there's this other tier playing itself out with strength. It's a lot to try to manage because now you've got a few variables. The statistics are new. It's kind of hard to parse it all together. But, even if you go into athletics, Tim Gabbett is sort of the godfather of load management, the Australian godfather of that realm of science for sports. And with the load management information, we kind of know that athletes are less likely to get injured from a load management error from the coaches if there's three variables that matter: if their age, their strength, and their aerobic fitness. You can't do anything about their age, okay? But if they're stronger and more aerobically fit, there's less likely to get hurt from this, a big spike in playing minutes or something where they had a lot of time off and then they came back. And it just seems like, look, like if you are a combo of aerobically fit and strong, you're a very robust individual.
So if the optimal amount to start with for cardio would be 90 minutes per week, you think?
Well, I think that you could see where it's too much for people in the beginning. It's a huge ask, but I would want to build people up to there.
How do you define too much for those people?
Psychological unwillingness to want to do it more than anything. Even with, I'll have some clients for, bodybuilding and things like that, like guys that are getting into it. And, when I say, hey, I want you to get in 30 minutes on the stair mill, they're just like, what? Like 30 minutes? Like, I tried to do 15 and almost killed me. I was like, well, that's not good. If you can't do 30 minutes on the Stairmaster, that's not a good situation, dude. Like you should be doing that 3 times a week at least. So, it's a big ask for people in the beginning. From a physiological standpoint, it shouldn't be, but from a psychological standpoint, it's a whole life change. So in the beginning, it might literally be 15 minutes total across the week, and then we'll work from there.
Right. How can you help these people be more willing, other than educating them or something, finding something that they actually enjoy doing? What else?
I think that's where it's the personal detective work into their life. You have to get to know someone and see like what they actually like and enjoy, and then go from there. Because with adults, people have very different perspectives on life and have very different things that they enjoy and hate. And, you can't expect everyone to just fall in line and do exactly the same thing. And so you do have to work, particularly, look, if you're working with professional athletes, it's a little bit different. Like they kind of have to do what you ask them to do. They're under contract. Like same with college athletes. With adults, man, they don't have to do anything you're asking them to do. Like it's all a convincing them game to get them to try to do as close to what you think is best for them as possible. But it's a hard game. So it's very much a long-term sort of figuring it out process and being very open-minded to what this person will tolerate.
Exactly. A lot of my clients, when they sign up, they tell us that they hate cardio, and all the target that we give them is just finding anything, whether it's a class, whether it's a game with someone, whether it's just anything, as long as they can stick with it.
Yeah, that's really it.
When it comes to strength as well as muscle building, do you think movement quality and standardization is important?
Well, when it comes to muscle building, I think that there's a big swath of things that work. Okay, and I think all you have to do is look back across all the different ways that people train in bodybuilding over the years to sort of see that that's the case. There's like what we would like to be the truth and what actually has happened across time. And I think that overall, most of the people that are very successful with growing a lot of muscle, they generally have pretty decent technique, but it's not like, exactly as the technique, Nazi people would say that it has to be. Like there's plenty of people that have grown a lot of muscle and you're like looking at their reps and it's not gigantic range of motion, there's people that will preach like, very strict and slow and controlled. And then there's other people that will move it a little bit faster and more aggressive. It's sort of like you're working with the personality of the person you're dealing with and you're trying to fit it to them, where slow and controlled for one person might drive them completely crazy. And then fast and aggressive for another person might be too much and like not really how they operate. And I just think it's like you can skin this cat a lot of different ways. Giving people different options, I think, is the best approach possible. Like, and I would say that overall, like, if you push this variable far enough, what you're going to find is that you'll incur roadblocks. Okay, and they could be orthopedic roadblocks, psychological roadblocks, something. And then once you face those things, do you have a different approach, a different tactic that you can take to work around it? And, that's where I try to standardize that as much as possible. Where, okay, if you've been, making progress, having great results, but all of a sudden now your knee or your elbow is flared up, what do you do? Okay. And so I kind of have like a tiered approach to that where it's like, all right, well, let's start by keeping the same exercise, reducing load, and seeing if that works. Okay. Just simply more reps. If that doesn't work and it's still a problem, let's reduce the velocity of the movement and go with a slower eccentric and slower concentric. If that doesn't work, let's go with a different exercise inside the same motor pattern. Okay. Now, if that doesn't work, then we probably can't do that motor pattern. All right. And we will do the other motor patterns that are not provocative until we've gotten to a point where it's not as hot, it's not as problematic. And now when we reintroduce the exercise, we go with the most grounded version of it with a slow and controlled tempo as our starting point. And from there, we can kind of take away some of the constraints and we can potentially add more speed and add more load. But your least likely provocative thing is going to be the highest constrained exercise with lower load and lower velocity.
Do you think it's more important to have consistency or variety in a general population's clients training program?
Well, now it's again kind of a personality thing because variety might lead to consistency for some people. And so you have to be willing to bend to the needs of the individual. And like this is why I don't really like personal training that much. Like it's just annoying to me. Like, oh God, here we go.
Mind games.
Yeah, it is that. Like, and it's just not a fun game for me. Like, I like the progress game. I really, that's sort of my thing. Like, hey, let's get fucking jacked and strong and all that stuff. Not let's play, romper room games with exercise variety so that you're learning something new all the time. But if variety is the only thing that keeps the person consistent, then that's better than inconsistency. So ultimately, consistency and adherence wins. But the route to getting to consistency and adherence might involve all kinds of craziness. I'm always trying to create some sort of a funnel that leads to most likely less variety over time. Like if you constantly switch the exercise, you are never, you're always kind of playing this neurological game. And it's hard to evaluate if their person is making tissue progress. Oh, you got stronger again from week 1 to week 2 with this new exercise. Not surprising, If you've been doing the same exercise for 16 weeks and you're getting stronger in week 15 to week 16, it's not a learning thing at that point. Like you've actually definitely done something at the tissue level where we can say you probably have more muscle for that muscle group that moves this load for that movement, which is what you want. You're not training for the neurological trophy. Like you said, you wanted body composition changes. So I think evaluating body composition can be hard because you're adding grams of muscle tissue a week. At best, it's like across 16 weeks, it's like how much muscle tissue are we actually adding for most people that are general population? It's like if you've got highly motivated, enhanced aesthetic athletes, that's a different animal. Like you could have added pounds of muscle tissue across 12 weeks in that population. But across, people that it's not a priority and their effort is questionable and their diet is all over the place and their lifestyle is not totally dialed in, it's grams of muscle tissue that you're talking about. And probably the only way that you can know that there's any level of progress is if they've gotten stronger at the same thing that they've been doing, not a different thing, a different thing, a different thing.
Do you think there's benefit to spending more time in lengthened ranges when it comes to either muscle building or mobility?
Well, I think that the research is going in that direction. I think that it's a bit muddled right now, but I think that it seems to be that the getting into a lengthened position for the muscle combined with the external torque being greatest for the exercise in the lengthened position is the biggest mechanical driver for, what seems to promote protein synthesis and growth. And I think that historically, like it makes sense to me because it's the hard stuff that nobody wants to do. Getting deep in a squat, getting deep in a hinge, getting deep in the pressing movements, those are all the things that you see people in the gym that are, at commercial gyms, that's what people avoid. They partial squat in the short position. They don't really get into a big stretch for their hamstrings when they're deadlifting or RDL or whatever. And then you get people that do the little mini reps at the top, the leg press that kind of goes 4 inches. Nobody's doing partials in the stretch, because I think that, torque is what stimulates muscles to adapt. Torque, it's all the moment arm stuff. I don't know how much we want to get into moment arms, but it's that horizontal distance between the rotation points and where the line of force is. And, so as you're squatting deeper, your hips move backwards, your knees move forwards. The line of force is right over the midfoot. So the more that you shove your hips horizontally away from the midfoot and the more that the knees go forward of the midfoot, the more torque you're creating. It just happens that aligns itself with squatting deeper. And that's what people avoid. They avoid torque. People are always like questioning what's butt wink. Butt wink is an outstanding method of decreasing torque. Butt wink simply brings the pelvis closer to the feet horizontally. That's what it does. It's an excellent neurological solution to reduce torque at the hips. And why is it safe and why does the research show that there's no relationship between butt wink? Because it's decreasing torque. And if you decrease torque, you decrease the demand on the musculoskeletal system. So if you can make people accept more torque over time, that is progressive overload. It's not even weights. You know what I mean? Like it's not this, like, God, time under tension has been something that in reality has not mattered for the exercise that you're in ever. And it's been discredited forever. And it's still something that people float around. I'm like, God, if I hear this any more times, like there's going to be at least a single homicide, single suicide situation here. Stop. It's just, create large levels of torque in whatever exercises that you're doing that actually hit and target the target muscle. Okay. If you're doing that and you're progressively overloading that torque over time, then you're creating the appropriate response for continued adaptation. But it's not just load. It's whatever is that combination of load and horizontal distance moment arm stuff that will create that. I think that is the sort of the thing that people are missing when they get all caught up in arguing one side or the other of the stretch research that's out there right now, And for the most part, I just look at it like whatever people avoid is the thing that is the answer. Like people avoid going close to failure because that sucks. People avoid getting into deep squats because that sucks with high torque. People avoid really hard dieting. Like people avoid really high volume. People avoid going to bed on time. Like all of the things that people avoid is the correct answer. And one of those just happens to be lengthened positions combined with high levels of torque.
Yeah, how's the saying that the magic you're looking for is in the work that you're avoiding?
Yeah.
So it's interesting, or I think it's beneficial to highlight that you don't just want to get into a lengthened position, but also basically load it. But
Yeah.
I would imagine when it comes to mobility, on the other hand, same as how you said that, for example, swimming would be a good entry point to mobility to some, maybe getting into these lengthened positions, having less torque could transfer over to mobility more. What do you think?
Well, I think that it's going to be based on what you can handle. Okay, so what I was saying with aquatic stuff is that you might be able to get into ranges of motion that you wouldn't be able to see the person get into on land because they don't have the strength to actually reach that level of stretch. Or it's not even stretch, it's shortening of certain muscles to get you up into that actual range. If you're talking about hip abduction, how strong are your hip abductors? They might not be strong enough at really short positions to abduct your hip because water really doesn't have yielding associated with it. It's all the overcoming action of the muscle. There's not any absorption. Range of motion is not just flexibility. It's not yielding, absorbing all. It's part of it is how short can you get things. And strength in short positions, while it might not be the most important thing from the perspective of growing muscles, it is still very important in terms of being able to bring your joints into specific positions.
Do you think it's important to feel a muscle that you're targeting as a beginner in the gym?
No, not necessarily, because they're so disconnected from everything with their body that it's almost like if it just needs to look right, and then ask them what's sore the next day. Like they just their neurology and their system is just, they've never done it before. They don't even know what to feel. Like there's a cluelessness about it. But again, I'm probably going to put them in like more of a machine so that I can pretty much guarantee like, hey, this hack squat is going to hit your quads. If your feet stay flat and something egregious doesn't happen, then I'm pretty sure it's going to be your quads. And then the next day I ask you what's sore, and they're like, oh, the front of my legs is sore. Then I think that over time now, they're going to know what that feels like. But it's, it was very interesting to me having a child and seeing in the beginning of his life, little babies can't feel anything. You know what I mean? Like you touch them and they only, like if you, like the Babinski test on the bottom of their foot, they have a reflex there, but they don't respond to anything. They actually have to learn to feel things. So I think it's the same thing. Like people have never really work their muscles, and so they don't know how to feel them yet. So that's something that I think is important to understand.
So someone coming into the first session, how would you explain to them that maybe if they want to be functional, they want to move better, maybe using machines is their best option?
I wouldn't even bother talking to them about it. I really don't think. I think we're trying to fight this battle that's emotional with cognition and logic. And I'm not going to say what I want to say because I don't want to get myself in trouble. But I think if that is a losing proposition. You fight feelings with feelings, okay? And so you just get them in there and you have them work. And you're fun and you have them work. And that's the best approach. And then after they've felt something, they're going to ask a question about their feelings. And once they ask a question, then they are open to an answer. But I don't ever answer questions that haven't been asked. There's that very old sophist saying that once the student is ready, the teacher shall appear. And I don't think enough people in fitness adhere to that concept. And they're just so ready to teach someone that doesn't want to learn anything. And that is a losing proposition.
A lot of people complain nowadays about having a weak core, whatever that means. There could be obviously a million reasons why that can be going on, but what do you think is the lowest hanging fruit for these people that's immediately actionable to sort of improve on it?
Yeah, I really like some of the work that a lot of the really smart Australian guys are doing recently, like Angus Bradley, Justin Smith.
Just had a podcast 2 days ago with Angus.
Okay, yeah. So, those guys are really promoting this idea of, flexing, extending, side bending, and twisting the trunk. And, I think that's an area where, I certainly wasn't promoting that stuff as much a few years ago when, I think people in the industry come in and out of vogue as much as ideas. And so I feel like I kind of had more of a heyday a few years ago, and I feel like these guys are really kind of like coming into their own and rising in a great way. And I think Angus is super creative. I love his approach to things. I think he's a very smart guy and really gets his points across with a beautiful combination of like logic, intelligence, humor, and also like a great dose of reality. Like there's points that I've disagreed with him in over the years, but they're minutia, and I think that we can both have really good conversations about those. And we're converged on almost everything. And an area where I feel like he's really come on strong, that was something that I was really missing, was more in the way of just like large dynamic excursions of, particularly thoracic movement. And there's a part of me where it's always like, is there any part of it I disagree with? And I would say like maybe, and it's just like I'm usually looking for people to have appropriate table tests with their, like I look at the thorax and the pelvis as my avenues into solving for table tests. That's my historical perspective on it. And I've traditionally used more of the positional breathing stuff to drive table test change. And once people pass table tests, then I enter them into motor patterns of training. And I would typically get my thoracic movement through my change of direction, my throwing, my triple extension, and my running training. Okay. So I hadn't really thought much about specifically side bending the trunk and extending the trunk and flexing the trunk. But I think that I was probably missing those elements when I really think about it from a specificity standpoint. And so I'm very open to those ideas. I'm probably still leaning to the direction that it's, maybe still a good idea to clear table tests first. But from a personal training standpoint, like there's all these areas where I'm like, okay, that's a good idea, but is it necessary? And I don't have an answer for that. It might not be necessary. Long story, maybe too long as an answer, but like it's probably an area I've neglected, probably an area that I should incorporate more for myself and the people that I work with, and something that is I think a logical, really useful perspective with some real runway inside of it.
It's really interesting you say that, because I was going to ask what you think about the mobile core versus a stronger core, because I really didn't hear you talk about mobilizing the core other than the breathing that you
Yeah,
said.
yeah. Look, I mean, I think really high levels of movement through the thorax is critical. I think the pelvis is as well. It's just harder to see it and conceptualize it with certain exercises. It's easier to just side bend and twist and extend and flex the thorax, and you will drive stuff into the pelvis with that anyways. But that which works for the thorax is that which works for the pelvis. So taking the same concepts and potentially thinking about tactics that we could use to do the exact same things with the pelvis would be maybe a next step in that direction as well.
What's your view on people trying to improve their static posture and just sit and exist nice and upright?
Stupid. It's like just,
Can you
bad.
elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's there's no relationship between static posture and anything, pain, performance, blah blah blah. It's just like it's a dead end road. Holding the same static posture, even if it was in plumb line, would not be good. Like it's always the more postures and positions you get into, the more that you fidget, the better. Slumping isn't any better or worse than anything else. The problem is staying in the same place in the same position for too long, and that's where it's like things like phones and computer work, and that can be a real problem because you're just like, has anything else glued a human being into a same position more than a phone? I don't think so. Like it's pretty bad. So static posture is actually really bad just as a topic. Regardless of what that is. It's just, you need to change. You need to constantly be doing something different.
Do you know Brian Johnson, the guy that is trying to live forever?
Oh, I've seen the commercials for the documentary on that guy.
Right. I think he has great ideas and he's very closely tracked, but his ideas on posture is just something I constantly have to fight with clients because all his other ideas are so good that they believe the posture is on point as well.
Uh-huh. Well, I kind of feel similarly with Peter Attia and like with his model and book Outlive. Like he is the king of frameworks. Like I think that is such a strength of his, and he breaks down the research so well. But his chapter on I don't even remember exactly what he called it, but it's essentially movement quality. It's just so clearly biased by DNS, and like I think DNS might be one of the worst approaches to bring to the gym ever.
What is DNS?
DNS is dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. It's like out of Prague and kind of, merged with like the Vaclav Vojta method from Germany of like working with babies that have neurological problems, and you touch them in certain places that make them go into these reflexive patterns that seem to help them not have as many neurological problems going forward. But it is essentially the examination of the steps through infanthood that lead towards locomotion, being able to locomote. And then examining your adult patient and finding what stage of infant development they're most missing, and then putting them into those positions with the movements from those places. So there's 3-month prone positions and 3-month static supine positions, and then very specific breathing things. Anyways, it's incredibly detailed and technical from that standpoint, and it's a lot of very small movements, and like it would require a tremendous time investment as well as attentional focus that I think is very hard to get out of most people in general. So it's like if I'm going to put my eggs into a movement approach basket, DNS is probably not it from a fitness perspective. It's like, I don't think that the paradigm is necessarily appropriate, as it's like superimposing that which is the stereotypical developmental sequence for an infant, superimposing that on an adult. I don't think is accurate necessarily. And I think that there's other. I think my approach is way better. Just to get down to it, like of thinking about it from a ground perspective and then a competency perspective, and just the most ground you can give someone in the beginning increases the probability of competency, and then strip ground until you arrive at a ground correspondence exercise that can still be done with competency. Like, to me, that's logical, has an actual framework, and is actionable in a way that is tolerable from the psychology of any normal person that's in a fitness environment.
What other harmful trends do you see in training nowadays?
And I wouldn't say that it's necessarily that's a harmful thing. I feel like that's
extremely the only inefficient.
Yeah, I think I want to say this. Peter Attia is a genius, in my opinion, and I think that is an area where he has been strongly influenced by practitioners who are well-intentioned, but I just don't think that the model is the best. I like the thought process, but the model is illogical to me.
It's like when gym equipment companies hire engineers that have never trained to build a machine.
Yeah. It's like, it's just missing. You're like, that's not going to work. That's just not it, man. Like, but harmful approaches to fitness, I try not to even look at stuff much anymore. I think the nocebo stuff is really problematic. I think that physical therapists who scare the shit out of people, it's really like, oh my God, you have 15 degrees of hip internal rotation. That's why everything hurts. Like, no, that's actually, you can't say that. That's not accurate. Like, oh, your back hurts because you were deadlifting. Like, the villainizing movements and saying that people have to be able to do these prerequisites before they can do other things, I think is really problematic. I think that there's so many examples of people that have way worse range of motion that can do movements just fine and not have any pain problems. Overall, like, the thing that's going to lead to not being in pain is, are you well trained, and is the programming being managed appropriately? Like, if you've been doing something for a while and you're fit inside of it and the programming is logical, you're going to be fine. I think people that like believe in magic bullet exercises are kind of problematic. Like, this exercise, look, I'll just get straight to it. Like, I think knees over toes guy is a problem from the magic bullet perspective, where it's like, hey, you're going to reverse yourself out of knee pain by walking backwards or doing this Nordic or something along those lines. And then, of course, you're going to have examples of people that had success with any methodology, because things heal and feel better over time in many instances. But then I'm sure that there's other people that have done it and not had success. And like, are we tracking those people? Are we doing anything with that? No, it's a business. But there's going to be a lot of people that believe that this approach is the only approach that works, and these magic exercises are the only things that work. And like, it's not a concept that's based on principles with, flexibility and fluidity from like what methods can be used inside of the principles. It's just, this is the exercise that you have to do, and any other exercise isn't as good or appropriate. And if you can't do this exercise, then that's why you have this problem, And so it's a weird nocebo in and of itself, of like creating these phony prerequisite concepts that we cannot point to with any level of true scientific efficacy, and claiming that they have powers, like almost magical powers, in regards to human pain and performance and things of that nature. So yeah, those are the areas that I think are kind of problematic and set up these cults and really just arguments for no real productive outcome inside the field on social media, et cetera, et cetera.
If someone is looking for a personal trainer, how can they recognize a good one?
Oh, good Lord. Good luck. Yeah, I'll say things that probably will piss a lot of people off if they actually listen to what I'm saying. I don't think that from the grand perspective of all the people in fitness, I don't think that the best and brightest in the world work in fitness. Okay. I think most of the people that work in fitness are like nice people with good intentions that like to exercise, and they probably didn't like doing their homework in high school for other subjects, and they just ended up here from that perspective. Okay. The really smart people went into other professions where they could earn a ton of money, and that, law and finance and medicine, blah, blah, blah. We're maybe a couple steps up ahead of the people working the register at fast food restaurants for the average fitness employee. Okay. Look, like if people have a problem with that, I said it. Okay. Like that's where I stand. And so if you can get a personal trainer to follow a really good script that somebody smart came up with, I think things are going to be just fine. Like if almost every personal trainer just literally took the RP hypertrophy app and applied that to all their clients, and the RP diet app and applied that to all their clients and measured their steps across the week, and they literally thought of nothing, they would probably get 99% better results than if they used their own mind to conceive of something. Because it's like you've just got a mind that doesn't understand the science behind anatomy, physiology, adaptation, systems. It's just not a sophisticated, highly skilled and competent mind to be making decisions about driving the physiology of an organism forward in a specific direction. That's a complicated task, man. So I just think taking the decision making for the most part away from most fitness professionals, if they can work inside of a system and you know that they're working inside of a system that has been vetted on a high level, then you're probably going to get a good personal trainer. If you are working with someone that is just making all of their decisions themselves, I am skeptical that you will be able to happen across someone that's competent and good at their job.
And when you say working through a system that has been vetted, you don't mean high street Equinox trainer.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, they're still using the goddamn FMS, It's a joke.
Yeah, sadly, most trainers just take random snippets from random people online, and then as the narrative changes, they just keep changing their approach.
Yep.
So clearly you don't miss personal training. Do you miss training athletes in person?
It's a good question. I like being involved with teams. I like when a team is on a mission and you've got good personalities in there. That's a rare thing to get, though. A lot of times you get teams that can just be, kind of a bunch of people doing their own thing and they're not really together. But when you have that special experience of teams with real leaders and everyone's on the same page and they're pushing each other, that just getting a chance to be part of that is that puts some gas in your tank. That's a special kind of thing to be involved with. So yeah, I do miss that part of it. And I do like when you've got, young people that are ready to learn and want to get after it and are coachable. That's a fun group to be involved with.
I think your background is in baseball, maybe. So what other sports do you enjoy coaching?
It's like football's great most of the time. Hockey is great. Wrestlers can be really good. Um, I think it's just you want to get the high talent pool sports a lot of the time. And in the USA, you're looking at football as by far number one. You just like all of our great athletes are in football. Like if we were able to take our football players and just put them in other sports and send them to the Olympics, the rest of the world would actually see the best athletes in the USA. Because right now you don't see them. They're all in the NFL. And so it's hard to not go that route, I think. And football is a training based sport. Like you have to be a monster to be a good football player with most of the positions that exist. Like if you're going to play on the line, you got to be strong as a bull. If you're going to be a linebacker, you've got to be like essentially almost like a lion. You got some nasty, nasty dudes in that sport, and it's fun when you see that level of athleticism and the aggressiveness that can go into that sport. That's kind of the one that everybody wants.
Do you work with any teams at the moment?
I don't, man. I'm just in my own world, just competing in bodybuilding and training for that.
Oh, you're still doing that?
Oh yeah, yep.
Is the goal a pro card still?
Yes, sir. Not just that, but to do damage in the pro division. I'm not in it just to be a hobbyist.
Crazy. A few rapid fire questions. What do you think a book is that everyone should read?
That's a good question. Super Training is still really good. I think Mike Israel's Scientific Principles of Hypertrophy is great. I think Zatsiorsky's Science and Practice of Strength Training is great. Cal Dietz's Triphasic Training book is fantastic. Mike Israel, Mike Boyle, his Functional Training books are outstanding. Christian Thibodeau's Little Black Book of Training Secrets is old, but I think is amazing. There's a ton of books. That's a good start, though. DB Hammer's book is like so forgotten in it too. That's a good one. I don't even remember the title of it, and people still aren't sure who DB Hammer was, but it's a cool book. Different thoughts altogether compared to anything else I've ever seen. Verkhoshansky, his coach's book is excellent. His coach's guidebook is amazing. That's a great start. Anybody would benefit quite a bit from that group.
Do you have a favorite exercise in the gym?
Maybe the really deep leg press, that RP style.
I knew it was going to be something leg related for you.
Yeah, man. Like that exercise is so fucked up. Like, nothing has ever packed a bigger stimulus that I've ever done compared to, and it's kind of got to be the right setup though. You know what I mean? Like if you get that Arsenal, or really the original model was the Nebula leg press, the angle, you put that seat all the way down, you put like a curved ab mat under your low back, you put the weightlifting shoes on, you let that sled come all the way down. Like I use Versa grips on the handles too to just glue me into the thing. And oh my God, like that is the most, like that exercise brings me to the darkest place I've ever been within a set. It's incredible. The range and the load and the fatigue that you can incur with that is unbelievable. So
you're a big proponent of obviously quad heavy movement or quad dominant movement. You want to keep your heels down, but if I think about Israel and deep leg press, they let the heels float. What do you think?
Well, I know Mike still cues where he wants the heels in contact. I know Chasm does a little bit more with heels off to be able to get like really deep knee flexion. I usually am more heel based. I want the heels in contact. I think that it's probably a safer bet for your knees in the long run. Just in general, heels with lifting weights is sort of synonymous.
An object under $100 that you cannot live without.
Oh, huh. Maybe Versa grips, and
Nice.
I get the really cheap knockoff ones, the death grips on Amazon.
I was
But
gonna ask what color, but then
dude, that's such a good tool for the weight room. It's crazy. It like makes every exercise where you're like holding something and grip might be a factor completely changes that exercise. Puts you so much more into the target muscle. You get way more rev. It's such a good tool. It's like everyone's like, oh, I just use straps. It's the same thing. It's like try the damn Versa grips, and for one set, one time, you're like, oh, it's different. Yeah.
and much quicker. You save a lot of time, by the way, not
Oh
having to wrap it
yeah.
around. What's your favorite quote?
Ooh, I don't, man, these are.
Or maybe a quote you live by,
Do I live by any quote? That's a really good question.
other than no bullshit?
Well, like my mixed martial arts quote, my mixed martial arts coach was always telling us that victory without sacrifice has no meaning, and I think that is a big one. Like even if you win something, but you didn't have to try that hard, it doesn't really mean as much. It's like the things that require you to go the furthest away from your comfort zone, and that's the stuff that makes you who you want to become.
I like that. Last one, a day in your life 5 years from now.
Oh God. I find those things to be so impossible. 5 years ago, I like trying to predict where I'd be now is
What would you like it to be?
well, let me think. I'm gonna be about 50. I want to be competing on a big stage in pro bodybuilding in 5 years. So if I am still being as consistent and adhering to everything involved with high level bodybuilding, if I've progressed on where I'm at right now, as I would like to across the next 5 years, then I think that would put me in the place where I would need to be to realize that goal. But at the same time, I hope to be a good father, a good son, a good partner to somebody, uh, a good friend to people, still someone that, people like yourself want to talk to for opinions on fitness and other things. I hope that I'm happy overall, like that I like those are things that I think are maybe increasingly important to me. That's a tough one because I've always been more about projects than people, to tell you the truth. But I think that can be somewhat empty in the end, and so I'm trying to be a little bit more about people than projects.
What do you think brought around this change?
Just being unhappy and seeing where things can go in life when the wrong things are emphasized.
Right. Having achieved so much in fitness already, what drives you to still be chasing the bodybuilding goal?
It's a real deal hard thing to do, man. It's a hard mountain to climb, and the other people trying to climb that mountain are ferocious people. You go to a local show and you can see how committed every single one of those people have been to this pursuit of this day for a long time, and particularly over the last few months. Like if you're gonna show up and place or win, like you you had to earn that thing because these other people are coming in with everything they've got. So it's like a human chess game in some ways, and the pieces that you've got are your training, your diet, your psychology, your commitment, your pharmacology. There's a lot of pieces that you had to move, but you will have had to have suffered significantly, pain, cardio, hunger, dealing with the voices in your head that make you bargain with yourself, want to quit, et cetera, et cetera. Every single one of these other people has gone through their own version of hell. And can you stomach a more hellacious trip than them? And that's a contest to me, man. That's a real thing.
And those are the sacrifices that are going to make it worth it in the end, as per your quote.
Yes, no question.
I would like to finish with a selfish question in the end. This is only useful for me and nobody else. So you used to do personal training in Manhattan. Right now, my business is in a pretty good place. I have 2 employees, one online, one in person. We charge a decent amount when it comes to London prices, definitely at the top. But whenever I talk to people or see anything online, they say New York is a really difficult place to establish a PT business.
Yeah.
What makes it special? Why is it more difficult than, for example, here? And do I have anything to worry about?
Well, one of the things that makes New York really hard is actually opening a facility, because construction is a nightmare in New York City. Okay, you got to deal with zoning and permits and construction crews that are going to try to rip you off, and it's expensive as hell, and it's going to take longer than you think. It's going to cost a lot of money up front. You got to be willing to get burned. Okay, and if you're not willing to get burned, you're never going to open the doors. And then once you do open the doors, now you got to deal with, trying to get good people to work for you, and one of the problems with New York is it's such a neighborhood thing. You're probably only going to get the people that are in that or proximate to that facility. Okay. You don't know who those people are, but nobody's willing to travel more than a couple of blocks to go to anything, because whatever you have exists 5 blocks, 10 blocks over. And so if you're not right there, then, it's just really tough. Maybe if you've got a reputation and people are like, wow, I really want to work under this guy. I want to learn from this person. I want to be part of this because I know this is going to be a hub of great training and I'll get better. How many trainers actually care about that, though? It's hard to find those people. And so there's a lot of things that are in the way that I don't think people are thinking about with New York. But New York operates on its own world. Like, it's very much a proximity-based city. And if you happen to set up shop in a dead zone, I don't care how smart you are, what your reputation, you're done. You're never going to make it. Location, 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 and also luck. And sometimes that doesn't come that easy.
What is the location or a few options for it?
Well, I mean, I'm hoping to start up a place this spring. I'm getting back into that world. So
after expressing your love for in-person training?
Well, I don't want to necessarily be directly training all of the people that are there as clients, but I want to be assembling the right people to train and giving them the right model to work under. So that's more where I fit into it, in my opinion, and just making good choices about like what equipment, what modalities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then just, I know that it's too big of a project for me to ever be able to bite off by myself. Like, you need the right people. You need the right connections. The only way you're going to win in New York is if you rig the game. That's it. You got to have everything accounted for before you go into it to ensure that you're going to have people coming in consistently, the right people there to be able to deal with If you're in New York, the one thing you can guarantee is everything's going to go wrong. Everything is going to go wrong. So if things are going to go wrong, do you have people that can deal with those problems? And I think so.
When and where are you opening your facility?
So it's going to be on 57th Street and Madison Avenue, and hopefully that will be sometime in the late spring or early summer.
Wow. Very exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.